Respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Why can't we all unite on one Eid? Is a question on the minds of many individuals. Why do our scholars, our maraja', our Islamic centers disagree on something as basic as the day of Eid al-Fitr? Some years we have 2 days of Eid, and other years we have up to 3 days of Eid. What's the problem? Why can't we unite on one Eid? And most people have two understandings regarding this topic. Number one, they see the multiple Eids as a harmful, negative, and unhealthy phenomenon that needs an urgent solution. Why? Why do they see it in that way? Simply put, is because they see this as causing, this disagreement is causing strife. It's causing discord, it's causing division, and it's causing disunity in the community. One community splits into two groups, sometimes three groups, each one has their own Eid. Sometimes even in one family you find they follow more than one marja' and they will have 2 or 3 Eids. And that just doesn't look good on us. It looks real bad on us. I mean, what will non-Muslims say? What will the Westerners say? What's wrong with these Muslims? They cannot even agree on something as simple as the day of Eid. So it looks bad upon us. It causes disunity, and it also causes inconvenience because we want to know ahead of time when the day of Eid is. We want to rent a hall, for example. We want to go on vacation. We want to take a day off work or school. We don't know when Eid is, and then we have 2 or 3 Eids. This creates chaos and this creates a mess. So this needs an urgent solution, and it's causing problems in our community. That's the first understanding that many people have. Number two, what's the cause of this disagreement? Why don't we agree on one Eid? The cause, most people, they point their fingers towards Najaf and Qawm. They say this stems from the maraja' themselves because number one, the maraja' cannot cooperate between themselves. They don't cooperate, they don't coordinate. They're supposed to sit together a few days before Eid, deliberate, talk about this, and then finally reach a unanimous statement. They reach consensus, and all of them together, they say the day of Eid, for example, is Tuesday, or the day of Eid is Wednesday. But because there is this lack of cooperation between them, they don't work together. Each one is stubbornly stuck to his own views, and they're not willing to cooperate. We have this problem. They say that it was the day of judgment, and someone all of a sudden woke up from his grave. He woke up, he noticed it's the day of judgment, so he began to panic. But all of a sudden he saw his friend who was buried right next to him. He's still sleeping. He hasn't awakened. So he began to wake him up. Wake up, it's the day of judgment. He wouldn't wake up. He insisted. He began to shake him, wake up. So he got up. He went back to sleep. He went back to the dead. He told them, what's wrong with you? It's the day of judgment. He told them, leave me alone. My marja' says tomorrow is the day of judgment, not today. So this is how some people see this, that in the maraja' and everything they have to disagree because of the lack of cooperation between them. That's one reason. Another reason for this disagreement is because our scholars are still relying on old archaic methods to determine the Eid. Like what? Like witnesses. We need 2 just witnesses to go out, spot the moon, and then they have to tell us. And this system of witnesses in itself is it's not very organized. You can have 2 witnesses say, we saw the moon, 2 witnesses say, we didn't see the moon. So because they're relying on an old method that's archaic, that's not very, very practical, this is the problems that we have. Now we have science, we have technology, and we should rely on science in determining the new month. Because they fail in relying on science, they don't understand science or they reject science, we have all these problems. So to many people, they see this problem, the different Eids, it's a silly and unnecessary problem that has an easy solution. And that's why When Eid approaches, many people are frustrated with the ulama, with the scholars and maraja, because they see the maraja don't coordinate, they're a mess, and it's 2019, and they are reluctant to rely on science. So that's why you see many people criticize the ulama, the maraja. You see many people, they attack and accuse the maraja of being backwards, and they don't work with each other, and the frustration builds. And the easy solution is, number one, to cooperate, and number two is to rely on science. And it's as if magically this entire problem will disappear and we will live happily ever after. This is how some people see this problem. Now tonight I want to go over this point. Why do the scholars differ on the day of Eid? And why can't they unite on one Eid? And is this accusation, the things that we mentioned already, is this fair? Is this a fair argument? Are we being fair towards the maraja and the ulama or not? And I want to go over 2 points. Number one, the first point of my argument is that when it comes to identifying the day of Eid and the new month, this is a very, very complicated issue, and it's not as easy as we think. That's number one. And number two, when we say, okay, you say that you have a better idea, what's your alternate idea? What's the alternative idea? There is no practical solution to this problem. And I'll speak about both of these points, inshallah, but first, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So number one, many people, like I said, they see it as a very simple situation. It's because there's no coordination and scholars don't rely on science. That's why we have the multiple Eids. While in reality, it's much, much more complicated than that. The issue of determining the first day of the Islamic month, the day of Eid or any other month, is a very, very complicated issue in fiqh, in Islamic jurisprudence. It's much more complicated than we think, and most people are ignorant of it. That's why they're frustrated, because they don't know. I personally have studied this topic. Why is there more than one Eid? What's the criteria for the new month? And it's one of the most difficult and complicated subjects in fiqh. I have taught it. I have also studied it. And I know that it's this difficult, and I understand why the ulama disagree. But for an average person who doesn't know, because he's ignorant, he thinks it's a simple situation, and he comes criticizing and accusing. So unfortunately, many times when we are ignorant, we come and we object. We have to first seek knowledge, understand why there is the disagreement. Only then we will give our ulama some credit. So like I said, it's a very complicated situation. Now yes, our ulama are not ma'soomeen. They are not infallible. They do make mistakes. And a little more coordination would be appreciated. It would be good, of course. It would be welcomed. But that's not the main reason why we have the multiple Eids. You see, the disagreement on the Eid is mostly a scholarly and academic dispute. It's not something where, let's get along and solve our differences and find one Eid. No, it's more complicated than that, because it's a scholarly and academic issue that they have between them. And it's mostly dependent on how each marja understands the Quran and the Hadith. Ijtihad. We have the door of ijtihad is open in our school of thought. Each marja, each alim has the authority to go look at the Quran, read the hadith, and based on his understanding, he can say what he thinks is right and wrong, what fiqh issues he gives his opinion on. So when it comes to this issue, what is the criteria for the new month, the new Islamic month? We find that there's a lot of hadith and verses regarding this, and each alim has the right to give their opinion. And when we look at these hadith, we see they're not very clear. They could go both ways. There's arguments on both sides, and both arguments of each side make sense. They're credible. So why do the scholars disagree? It's not because it's not a sign of discord. It's not a sign that they don't cooperate, they reject each other, that each alim is stubbornly stuck to his people and his views. No. It's because the ijtihad of each marja and alim differs from the other. That's how we human beings are. Each human being has the right to his opinion, especially if he is an expert. If he has an expert opinion, it should be respected. So this problem stems mainly from the Quran and the ahadith. And I will give you some examples so that we better understand why there is this disagreement between the ulama. First, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Number one, the unity of horizons and multiple horizons. You see, ever since the beginning of Islam until the 20th century, before the 20th century, how would the Eid be decided? Two people or more from each village, they would go moon sighting. They would go somewhere where it's clear, the horizon is clear, and they would look for the moon. If the moon was spotted, they would come to their local scholar in their village, they would report that, and the scholar would announce the Eid. If no one saw the moon, there's no verified reports of the moon in their village, obviously the next day will be Eid. So not tomorrow, the day after tomorrow would be Eid. This was the tradition of Muslims for over 1,000 years, until the 20th century. What happened in the 20th century? We had globalization. The world turned into one small village because of how interconnected the cities and the countries and the continents became. Now you have cell phones, now you have radio, now you have satellite, now you have internet. And it's so easy to access another person that's halfway the other side of the world, isn't it? That's one thing. And another thing is Muslims began to spread all over the world. Now you have Muslims in North America, like here. We have Muslims in South America. Muslims, we have even Iceland. We have Muslims in Scandinavia, in China, in Australia, New Zealand. So Muslims began to spread from the Middle East all over the world. So what did this create? Now, not only do we receive reports of moon sighting from our village, now your friend could call you up from China, from Australia, and New Zealand, and South America, and Africa, and tell you, I saw the moon. But no one saw it in my city, in my country, or maybe even in my continent. What do I do here? This is a problem that didn't really apply back then. Because back then, means of communication was difficult. It would take a month to reach news of anything from a different continent or country. Now, instantaneously, someone could call you, FaceTime you, and show you the hilal, and he's in New Zealand. He's thousands of kilometers away. So we, the people of Vancouver, can we rely on a country that's 10,000 kilometers away or not? You see, this is a dilemma in the Hawza between the scholars. Here you find two views. The first view are the scholars that believe in multiple horizons, like a Sayyid al-Sistani, like a Sayyid al-Shirazi. They believe that when we go back to the ahadith, we can find clues, we can find evidence, even though it's not going to be, very, very clear evidence, because this didn't apply too much during the time of the Imams, but yet we can find some clues to show that each area has their own horizon. You cannot rely on the horizon of another area. So what if New Zealand saw the moon? New Zealand has a different horizon, has nothing to do with Canada. Just like sunset. If someone calls you from New Zealand and tells you, you know what? The sun has set now. Can I break my fast because the sun set in New Zealand? No. Each city has their own obligation and their own laws. So they said that the moon is just like the sun. Sun, each area, they have to go by their sunrise and their sunset. The moon, the same thing. And they mentioned the ahadiths that they thought, based on their ijtihad, proves this. And that's why you find most of these scholars that believe in ta'addud al-afaq, multiple horizons, they say that the moon has to be spotted in your area. Now, what does your area mean? This is also, subject to interpretation and debate. Some have said 100-kilometer radius. Some have said 200-kilometer radius. Some have said 300-kilometer radius. It also differs from season to season, from month to month. It also depends on the astronomical factors, like, for example, the moon. How long does it stay, after the sunset? For example, the elongation of the moon, the altitude of the moon, the age of the moon, so on and so forth. There's a lot of astronomical factors that determine the radius that you can rely on. But let's say between 200 to 300-kilometer radius, the moon is spotted there. You can follow that area. For example, here you can follow, let's say, Seattle and maybe possibly even Portland. But if the moon is spotted, for example, in South America, it's spotted in Mexico, it's spotted in Africa, Australia, that's too far. They have a different horizon. You cannot follow them. This is one view. And then there's another view. The view that's called unity of horizons, wahdat al-afaq. These scholars believe that if the moon is spotted anywhere in the world, then you can also follow that. You can also use that to say tomorrow's Eid, tomorrow is the first day of Ramadan, as long as you share a portion of the night with them. So as long as your nights overlap, even if 5 minutes they overlap. And this is the view of a Sayyid al-Khou'i rahmatullah alayh. And there are some contemporary scholars that also believe in this. So they tell you, for example, if the moon is spotted in Brazil, because you share your night with them, you can follow. So we could call people of Brazil, tell them go and look for the moon. If they saw it, we can rely on them. The moon is spotted in Africa, we can rely on them, and so on and so forth. And when we come to the second opinion, Wahdat al-Afaq, they have their own justification and their own arguments, and their arguments make sense, they're credible. Now, which one is the true, correct, the correct opinion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts? Which one is the true one? Only Allah knows. We don't know. What we have is ijtihad. We have scholars that try to reach to the truth, but we don't know which one's correct. But each one has their own arguments, and each one will answer Allah on the Day of Judgment, correct? Each alim has their own arguments. He has his own justification. We don't know what's right. So this is the first reason, brothers and sisters, why we have disagreement, is because the opinion on which city you can rely on differs. So that's number one. Number two. Now, up until maybe the last century, we didn't have anything called telescopes, were there? Maybe telescopes, they're fairly new. I think within the last century they were discovered. Or maybe the maximum last 2 centuries. What happened is in this last century, because of technological scientific advancements, scientists discovered telescopes, and they allow you to see the moon much before we are able to see it with the visible eye, with the naked eye, correct? You can spot the moon with a telescope hours, maybe a day, an entire day before it is visible with the naked eye. Now, like this, once again, didn't apply to the times of the Imams, alayhimussalam, because there was no telescope. So there isn't a clear hadith about this, because there's no such thing as telescopes. Now that the telescope is discovered and invented, let's say we spot the moon with a telescope. Can we rely on that, or does it have to be spotted with the visible eye? Here there's 2 opinions between the scholars. Some scholars, they say we can rely on telescope. Why? Because the ahadith of the Imams told us, Sum lil-ru'ya, waftar lil-ru'ya. When do you start Ramadan fasting? When you see the moon. When do you stop fasting? It's the day of Eid. When you see the moon once again, correct? When you see the moon. When I see the moon with a telescope, did I see the moon or I didn't see the moon? I saw the moon. The Imam said, if you see the moon, break your fast, it's Eid. I saw the moon. So what's the problem? This is a type of sight. So that's why they rely on the telescope. They say telescope is okay to use. They give another argument. They say, one of our laws is that it is haram to see a woman without her hijab, correct? If a muhajjaba girl, woman, is not wearing her hijab, it's haram for me to see her. What if I have a telescope and this girl, this lady is 20 kilometers away and I am able to see her without hijab with a telescope? Is that haram or halal? They said no alim has even thought about this. Every marja' consensus, it is haram to see a woman without her hijab, even if it's with telescope. Why? Because there's no difference. Naked eye, telescope, the point is you saw her. Same thing, apply it to the hilal, the crescent. See it with the naked eye or with the telescope. They're both a type of sight. This is one opinion. Now maybe you're convinced by this because these arguments make sense, but the other group has their own arguments that they also make sense. The other group, which is most of the maraja' of today, they don't accept relying on telescopes. Why? Because they don't accept science? No. Because they're still living in the Stone Age? No, that's not why. Because they also have their own arguments that stem from the ahadith. We have to go back to the ahadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, and whatever they told us, we follow. 2 reasons. Number one, they tell us that, look, if we were to rely on telescopes, what would happen? Most of the times, the moon is spotted by telescope one day before it is visible by the naked eye. So let's say for example, this year Eid is either Tuesday or Wednesday, correct? Based on the different opinions that we're speaking about. Now, astronomers say that Monday night, it's impossible to see the crescent with the naked eye. Tuesday night, it's possible to see it with the naked eye. Correct? Tuesday night. So thus, the Eid would be on Wednesday if we relied only on the naked eye. But many times, it will be visible one day earlier if we use a telescope. So Tuesday night, in some parts of the world, Monday night, we can see it with a telescope. So usually, whenever we are able to see the moon with the naked eye, one day earlier, we could see it with a telescope because the telescope is much more powerful. They say based on this, when was the telescope discovered? 100 years ago, correct? From the time of the Imams until 100 years ago, 1,000 years, Muslims were always fasting on the wrong day and having Eid on the wrong day because they had no telescope. Because if they had a telescope, they would have seen the moon one night earlier. And that means they're always starting Ramadan late, and they're always fasting on the day of Eid because nobody had a telescope. It's right there. We just need a telescope to see it, but no one has a telescope. It's not invented yet. So tomorrow, which is Eid, because the Hilal is right there, we just need a telescope. Everybody's fasting on the day of Eid, which is haram. That also means Laylatul Qadr. Almost every year, the Imams and all the Muslims, they did it wrong because they were always one day late. Because with the telescope, you're always one day ahead. You could always see it one day. Not always, but most of the times you could see it one day before. So that doesn't make sense. Can anyone suggest that for 1,000 years, the Imams, all the Muslims, most of their Hajj, because Hajj also has to do with the Hilal, we have to do Hajj on the 9th of Arafah, their Hajj was batil. Their Siyam was one day late. They used to fast on the day of Eid and they used to have Eid one day late. Can anyone suggest that? That doesn't make sense. So this shows us that the criteria, the true correct criteria for the new month is not telescope, it's the naked eye. If you see it with the naked eye, that's when it begins. I don't care what happens before that. Can use telescopes. So that's one justification that the other group uses. Number two, they say we have a hadith from the Imams where a narrator comes to the Imam and he asks him this. He says, we were a group and we went to see the moon. Only I saw it. Nobody else was seeing it. Why? Because this person had extra sharp eyes. He had more than 20/20 vision. The Imam tells him, according to their understanding of this hadith. Now remember, it's not too clear, but this is what they understand from the hadith, that the Imam told that narrator, you cannot rely on your eyes if it's too sharp. It has to be an average eye. If you spot the moon with an average eye, you can have Eid tomorrow. If you have very powerful eyes like binoculars, like a telescope, you cannot rely on the eyes. If you can't rely on sharp eyes, we can rely on telescopes. So once again, this goes back to what? The hadith of Ahl Bayt. It's not about accepting or rejecting science. It's about what the Imams taught us in the ahadith. So this is number two, why there is disagreement between the scholars. Because some accept telescope, some don't. And that's why one night, maybe for example Monday night, the hilal, the crescent can be seen by the telescope, but not the naked eye. So obviously the ulama are going to differ based on their opinions. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Number three, a second aspect of science that we suggest scholars should use is astronomy. Falak, astronomy. Why don't scholars rely on astronomy and they can predict the next month? They can predict the Eid. We don't need witnesses anymore. Now science has advanced. Astronomers have advanced and they can predict this for us. So why don't scholars rely on astronomers? Now 2 points, brothers and sisters. Number one, when it comes to astronomy, I've personally spoken to a Muslim astronomer. Astronomers say that we can predict two things for you when it comes to the moon. Number one, astronomers can predict the new moon. The new moon, Wiladat al-Hilal in Arabic, astronomers can predict the new moon. Okay, if they can predict the new moon, why don't we just take their word? The problem is, even though they can accurately predict the new moon, Wiladat al-Hilal, but the new moon means nothing. Even if Jibreel comes down to you and tells you the new moon is born, so what? The new moon does not equal the new month, does not equal Eid. It's a different criteria according to the ahadith. And that's why there is ijma', consensus between the ulama, that even if you know 100% the new moon is born, tomorrow is not Eid. Because the new moon has nothing to do with it. Who said the new moon equals tomorrow's Eid? There has to be a hadith, right? Or I can't just assume that. There is no hadith that says that. In fact, even during the times of the Imams, there were astronomers. Astronomy isn't new. It existed since the time of the Greeks. Google it. Even during the times of the Imams, astronomers could predict the new moon. But the Imams never relied on them. Because the new moon means nothing. So what? Even if the new moon is born. It does not signal the beginning of the new month. It does not mean tomorrow is Eid. So the first thing that astronomers can tell us, new moon is useless. Even though they are accurate with it, but it's useless. But then there's a second thing that astronomers can predict. And that is the visibility of the moon. Not the new moon. The visibility of the moon on your horizon. Astronomers can tell you if the moon can be seen or not in your area. So why don't we rely on that? Scholars say, yes, this is good. This is the criteria for the new month. The visibility of the moon. Whether visibility by telescope, naked eye, remember we spoke about that. But the point is, the visibility of the moon on your horizon, this is good. This is what the Imams told us. Sum lil-ru'ya, waftul lil-ru'ya. What's the problem here? Scholars are still reluctant to rely on astronomers. They have their reservations. Why? You know why? Because astronomers themselves, they admit, when it comes to predicting the visibility of the moon, we can only give you a guess. We can't tell you 100% what we're saying is true. I personally spoke to a well-known Muslim astronomer. He said any astronomer that claims, I tell you the moon can be sighted 100%, he's lying. We can only give you an estimate because there's too many factors that we have to do the math and then we give a guess. Now it's an educated guess, of course, 70%, 80%, but 100% no. So because there is room for error and they themselves aren't 100% sure, scholars say, wait a minute. We can only rely on science and scientists and astronomers if it is 100%. No room for error. With the new moon, there is no room for error, but it's useless. With the visibility of the moon, it's useful, but there is room for error. So what do we do here? We're stuck. The problem is in astronomers themselves. If astronomers, they progress and they advance more and more until they can tell us that when we tell you the moon is visible in your area, this is 100% complete certainty, then we can rely on them. So you see the problem, it's much more complicated than we think. Why don't scholars rely on science? The problem is what we mentioned. It's a very complicated issue. But however, many scholars have said that if you on a personal level believe that a certain astronomer, a website, a moon sighting website is very accurate and it gives you atmi'nan, it gives you certainty, then on a personal level you can rely on it, but you cannot enforce this on other people. You can't go to other people, why don't you say tomorrow's Eid, moonsighting.com said this. Brother, sister, you, on a personal level, you believe moonsighting.com is accurate. I don't. You can't enforce this upon me. So now it's a personal issue. If I believe moonsighting.com is 100% accurate, when it says the moon is spotted in my area, it will be spotted, I can rely on it. But it's a personal issue. It's an individual issue that we cannot enforce on other people. And this is the fatwa of Sayyid Sistani. He says, for me, usually falak, astronomers, I am not certain of their words because they disagree between themselves and they themselves aren't sure. But you on a personal level, based on your research, if one astronomer, if a website, an agency, it gives you certainty, then obviously you can rely on them. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So this is 3 reasons so far why there is a dispute between the scholars. It's not because there's a lack of coordination. It's not because they reject science. It's because their ijtihad differs. And each scholar has the right to his own ijtihad. So this is 3 reasons we mentioned. And finally, number 4. Sometimes we notice that there are verified reports of moon sighting in a place which is the same horizon. It's our ufuq. But yet some maraji', they reject those moon sight, those reports. Why? Now here, many people they start the accusation. See, the alim, because those witnesses weren't from his people, from his jama'ah, he rejected them. Because he's sleeping in his cocoon in Najaf and Qom, he doesn't know that there's the report, yet he says tomorrow is not Eid. Even though people saw the hilal in his city or in a nearby city, but yet he rejected. And the accusations start. Why? Here, once again, this is because of his ijtihad. He's aware that maybe 10 people saw the moon. He's aware that they're all honest, that they don't lie, but yet because of his ijtihad, he cannot accept their reports. Why? Because this stems from the ahadith of Ahlul Bayt, brothers and sisters. Let me read you a hadith. The Imams themselves said this in one hadith. Listen to this hadith. It's narrated from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. The Imam says in this hadith, the narrator asked Imam al-Sadiq, قُلْتُ لَهْ كَمْ يُجْزِي فِي رُؤْيَةِ الْهِلَالِ. How many witnesses do we need in order to say tomorrow is Ramadan, tomorrow is Eid? Look at what the Imam says. The Imam said, إِنَّ شَهْرَ رَمَضَانَ فَرِيضَةٌ مِنْ فَرَائِضِ اللَّهِ فَلَا تُؤَدُّوا بِالتَّظَنِّي. The Imam says that fasting, whether it's the beginning of Ramadan, ending your fasting Eid, this is amongst the fara'id Allah. It's amongst the obligations that Allah has obligated towards us. So he says we have to be very strict with this, and we cannot follow suspicion, doubt. We need yaqeen, ilm. And then the Imam says this, وَلَيْسَ رُؤْيَةُ الْهِلَالِ أَنْ يَقُومَ عِدَّةٌ فَيَقُولُ وَاحِدٌ قَدْ رَأَيْتُهُ وَيَقُولُ الْآخَرُونَ لَمْ نَرَهُ إِذَا رَآهُ واحد رآه 100 وإذا رآه 100 رآه 1000. The Imam says in this hadith that what we understand from this hadith is that if a group of mu'mineen go to spot the moon, let's say 50, but only 5 see the hilal, only 1 sees the hilal, the rest they're looking, they can't see it. The Imam says you cannot rely on that testimony, on that witness. إِذَا رَآهُ وَاحِدْ رَآهُ 100. If one person could see it, 100 should see it. I mean, why is only one person seeing it? What's so special about him? Sometimes this happens. A group goes, or 2 groups go. One group sees it, the other doesn't. Why? And they're both experts. You can't say, well, the first group, they're experts, they know. No, they're both experts. They both have an astronomer with them. The Imam tells us, basically, the criteria is this. The hilal should be in a state where everyone could see it. Most people could see it. If it's 1 person, 2 people, 3 people out of a big group, we cannot rely on that. So even if there are verified reports that 2-3 people saw the moon, maybe the marja' is going to reject that. Why? Because the Imam told us so. The Imam says if a big group goes, most of them have to see it. 2-3 people, that's not enough. Why? Because number 1, maybe they had extra sharp eyes. Remember we said? According to some ulama, that's not acceptable. Number 2, maybe they thought they saw the hilal. The hilal on the first night is very thin, very small. Maybe they saw something else. You know, they say one day they brought a witness to a alim. He said, I saw the hilal. When they saw him, no one had seen the hilal. They saw a piece of his hair was going across his eyes, and he was looking at his hair the whole time. He thought it was the hilal. Sometimes we think we see the hilal. It's something else. We don't know. It's something in the sky. Could be a bird. It could be a plane. It could be, I don't know anything. So maybe that person made a mistake, even though he does not lie. But because he's the only one claiming he saw it, nobody else saw it, and people went to see it, we have to be careful. So that's a 4th reason why scholars sometimes they're reluctant to rely on verified reports. Meaning they are what? They are thuqat. They are just, and they are truth-telling and reliable. So it's for all these reasons, my friends, that scholars disagree. It's not because they don't cooperate. It's not because each scholar only relies on his jama'ah. If there is witnesses from another jama'ah, he does not accept them. That's not true, brothers and sisters. This is unfair criticism, unfair accusations. The reason why they differ, and there's 1, 2, 3 Eids, is because their opinions, their ijtihad in the Quran and the Hadith differs. Now, this is point number 1. Now we understand why we have more than 1 Eid. Question number 2. What's the solution? What's the solution? Some people say only if the maraja' sit together, they can work it out and arrive to one conclusion. This, my friends, this type of thinking is naive. You know why? Let's say right now, Sayyid al-Khou'i was alive. Some 50% of you follow Sayyid al-Khou'i, and 50% of you follow Sayyid Sistani, okay? Now Sayyid al-Khou'i and Sayyid Sistani, they gather a couple of days before Eid, they want to have one Eid. What are they supposed to do? And let's say, just like this year, the hilal is supposed to be spotted in Australia, and astronomers say 100%. What is the Sayyid Sistani supposed to do? Sayyid Sistani can say this. You know what? He can tell his followers, even though I believe Tuesday is not Eid, it is Ramadan, and it is haram to break your fast on the day of Ramadan. But for the sake of unity, I tell all my followers to break their fast Ramadan and do all the mufattirat in Ramadan. Is that a practical solution? Obviously not. How would he have the audacity to do that? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to hold him accountable on the day of judgment. According to your opinion, ijtihad, Tuesday was Ramadan. Why did you tell the people to follow, to break their fast? Just for unity? Who gave you the authority? So isn't this practical to say, let's say it's Sistani, tell his followers, even though he thinks Australia is useless and in Vancouver it's still Ramadan, but let him tell his followers to break their fast. Only a naive person would say this, brothers and sisters, because Sayyid Sistani and all the maraja, when they tell you that this is halal, haram, Eid, they will be held accountable by Allah. They have to have an answer. So if he truly believes, according to the ahadith, that you can't rely on Australia, how can he tell us to rely on Australia? How? This is haram. That means he has if he did this, that means he has no taqwa. He has no fear of Allah. He just wants to make people happy. And he's able to trample his principles and his ijtihad just to make people happy. So, Sayyid Khoi and Sistani are sitting in that meeting. Sayyid Sistani says, you know what, this is an idea, but it's not a practical idea. He can't do that because Allah will hold him accountable. Okay, so then the ball is in the court of Sayyid al-Khoi. We tell him, fine, Sayyid al-Khoi, you have to make a compromise. Okay, Sayyid al-Khoi says, even though I believe that we can rely on Australia, and thus Tuesday is Eid, this is my ijtihad, but for the sake of unity, I'm going to tell my followers to fast. This is haram. We are not allowed to fast on the day of Eid. So he would be instructing all his followers to do haram, and that is to fast on the day of Eid. So wait a minute, that's also not practical. So what do we do? What do we do? Yalla, we want to have one Eid. What do we do? You see, there is no practical solution. Because when the disagreement stems from ijtihad, from principles, then there is no way to work out a compromise. It's not a personal problem that they have that they can just solve it out, just work it out in that meeting. No, this is their understanding of religion. And if each one understands religion in a different way, what do? They can't reconcile this. Now, there are some solutions which aren't really practical. Go and travel. Go and, 22 kilometers drive outside your city limits and break your fast on Tuesday and then come back. But come on. You want Sayyid Sistani to order millions of his followers to all just travel one day and break their fast and then come back? It's not practical. It's possible, but it's not a practical solution. And even then, people won't be happy. Even then, people will be complaining because now they have to drive. Now the gas money, here gas is expensive. It's going to cost you like $60, $70 just to do that. And we're going to want Sayyid Sistani to pay for it now. And in addition to that, it takes time because you have to travel 22 kilometers outside your city limits. So the greater Vancouver area. So you have to drive 20 kilometers just to leave Vancouver. And then you start counting 22 kilometers. That's going to take you an hour and a half, for example. An hour to an hour and a half. So it's not a practical solution. What about the old people? What about, people that don't have cars? People that can't drive? What about someone that is kathir al-safar? Someone that always has to fast even if he's traveling. He can't do this because even if he travels, he has to fast. So this isn't really a practical solution. Another solution, we tell the followers of a Sayyid al-Khoi, Tuesday, don't have Eid. Don't fast, but just don't eat anything. Out of solidarity for the followers of Sayyid Sistani, fast with them, but don't make the niyyah of fasting. Just don't eat anything. And then have a Eid on Wednesday with the followers of Sayyid Sistani. Will they accept that? Never. The followers of the marja' that has the first Eid are always happy. They're not complaining, are they? Who are the ones that are complaining? The followers of the marja' that has the second Eid. So, well, trust me. And this shows you that it's all about the desire, the nafs. If it was really about unity, one year, let's ask the followers of the maraja' that have the first Eid to fast, not a shar'i fast, remember? We're just not eating. Out of solidarity, for the sake of unity, don't eat, don't have Eid. Postpone your Eid till the next day. Will anyone do that? They won't. Maybe only a few. The majority, They can't believe that they could eat now, that they could go out and have lunch, so they won't do that. So the problem is with us, brothers and sisters. Don't blame it on the maraja'. It's all about the desire. It's who can serve his personal interests and desires more. So we can't blame it on the maraja'. The maraja' are just doing their job. Their job is to read the ahadith and based on their understanding of the ahadith to give a fatwa. The marja' cannot give his own personal opinion. Maybe the marja' would love to have unity, but he can't. Because his ijtihad says it's this day, the ijtihad of the other marja' says it's another day. So we can't be naive, brothers and sisters, and ask the maraja' to all agree. It's like two doctors that disagree. One doctor says, my patient needs the surgery. Another doctor looks at his file, he says he doesn't need a surgery. How can they agree? How? This doctor, first one, he truly, sincerely believes he needs the surgery or else he's going to die. The second one disagrees. He says, no, the surgery is bad for him. How do they agree on this? How can they unite on one opinion? It's impossible. That's why we go for second opinion, third opinion, correct? You've heard of second opinion. Why is there second opinion? Why don't doctors all agree? Well, I wish doctors all agree, but this is being naive. In this world, human beings, each person has his own understanding, his opinions, has his own justifications and arguments. We can't expect all of a sudden the maraja' to be identical clones. They all think alike, they all give the same fatwas. No. Go to any field that has experts, the experts are going to disagree. Each expert is going to have his own view. There's going to be 2 views. There's going to be 3 views. There's going to be 4 views. And the ulama are no different. The ulama also have the right of ijtihad. So what we really need, brothers and sisters, is to first, we shouldn't judge when we are ignorant. Oh, the ulama this, the ulama that, and we have 2 Eids. So what? Let's have 2 Eids. Let's have 3 Eids. Let's have 7 Eids. So what? The more Eids, the better. Why are we complaining on more Eids? Let's have a week of Eid. There's no problem with that. And this shows, brothers and sisters, when I find myself complaining about 2 Eids, what does that mean? That means I am in a state of batar. That means I am so indulged in the ni'am of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I have so much ni'am of Allah that I have nothing to worry about but 2-3 Eids. There's people who are worried about real problems in life and they're suffering. And I'm worried about 2 and 3 Eids? Come on. That's not even a problem. So let there be 2-3 Eids. So what we really need is first knowledge and number 2, patience, brothers and sisters. For 29 days we're fasting. Don't ruin your thawab just because of 1 day. Because I want to have Eid 1 day earlier. The point is to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The point isn't to have 1 day of earlier Eid. The point, we would love unity, but even unity sometimes isn't the greatest goal in life. The greatest goal in life is not to unite, it's to serve Allah, correct? Or else if our goal is to unite, let's go reunite with the Christians. Isn't this unity? Let's go just, change our religion, become Christians, and life will be so much easier. Unity is only valuable if it's not at the cost of my principles. I can't sacrifice my principles and say unity, unity, unity. Unity is good only if we can adhere to our principles. If we cannot, then the main goal and objective of my life is not unity, but rather to please the Almighty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if I truly believe that my marja' is the most knowledgeable one, khalas, I follow him. And he will answer to Allah on the Day of Judgment. It's not my decision, it's not my judgment, nor will I be held accountable. This is the best way to finish the month of Ramadan, brothers and sisters. So like I said, the Eid will be either Tuesday based on some maraja' or Wednesday based on other maraja'. Follow whatever your marja' tells you, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept your siyam during this month and give you the best of ثواب. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات. اللهم عجل لوليك الفرج واجعلنا من أنصاره وأعوانه والمستشهدين بين يديه. وإلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات نهدي ثواب الفاتحة مع الصلوات.